Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Ezra seminar here today. Today we have as our speaker Dr. Charlie C. She's a professor of practice here at Cornell in the Systems Engineering program. Just a few notes about her. She has very recently received the 2023 Underwriters Laboratories ACEN U.S. Science Prize for Women in 2023, so a very recent award. She's also recognized as one of 2021's Outstanding Young Scientists by the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology. She serves as a board member for Asia Pacific Industrial Engineering and Management Systems. Her research interests are robust optimization and systems thinking. She developed an algorithmic framework called the Target-Oriented Robust Optimization, or TORO, which integrates uncertainty at the endpoint of decision-making. So TORO has been extensively used in the design and to plan engineering systems, including infrastructure and network planning in energy production and water networks. Charlie received her PhD at the National University of Singapore. Again, welcome, Charlie.
Thank you. So, thank you, Cliff, for the introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. Good afternoon. So I'm going to talk about that framework, target-oriented robust optimization, and it's one way to integrate uncertainty to optimization problems and decision-making in general. So I guess the first question really is whether or not it is even worth it to consider uncertainty and optimization problems, because performing optimization is already hard enough. Do we need to go this extra step, to integrate that complexity? Well, the answer is yes. It's primarily because real-world optimization problems would almost always contain uncertainty, right? Whether these are estimation errors, prediction errors, we find ourselves always guessing or anticipating, right? But the question is, do you actually make it a point to go this extra mile? Well, you should, according to Benthal and Nemirovsky. They did it in the early 2000s. They performed a series of experiments, and they actually found out that even a 0.1% perturbation, so meaning if your parameters deviate by as small as 0.1%, this could lead to 125% constraint violation. So in layman's terms, it almost makes your model useless when you want to implement in the real world, right? How can you use those solutions when in fact they actually violate one or more of the constraints? Now, this is not exhaustive, obviously just two things, but the literature actually tells us that there have been extensive efforts to introduce that. The most intuitive way is to perform sensitivity analysis. It's the easiest, it's the most accessible, but it's almost worthless when you think of it, right? Because it's post-mortem. You would know whether your solution is bad or good, but it doesn't really tell you, so what should I do? It's not prescriptive. Again, it's post-mortem, it's after the fact. Now, there is stochastic optimization. This is more common. It's actually a way to counter the uncertainty. However, it has a strong assumption, which is repeatability. When we say repeatability, for example, you want to know the service time of McDonald's. So therefore, you actually observe every day and see and observe how long it takes. So you need to be able to continuously repeat that action. And that's basically the source of your probabilistic information. But again, there are instances wherein this is not possible. For example, you want to build a factory. You wouldn't really have any basis on the information that you want to build, right? And I guess for OR practitioners, if you are building an optimization model, this is one of the things that you have to consider, the curse of dimensionality. They are NP-hard, so you can build an elegant model, but eventually you won't be able to solve them. right? Now, there is another thing. It is the classical version. The classical robust optimization, it takes away the assumption of the probabilistic information. And you can actually solve it as an LP or a linear programming model. However, on the first version of robust optimization, it was just too conservative. Because the proponents want to ensure feasibility, they gave up a lot of the optimal or the value of what they want to achieve. So in the end, you might ask yourself, is it even worth it? Now, let's step back a bit and look at another perspective. So in decision theory, the proponents actually say that people rarely optimize their decisions. It's because of the complexities involved. Okay? Knowing that everything eventually is uncertain, so they rarely optimize their decision because doing so implies a need for a perfect model. So Sturman, he's one of the proponents of system dynamics, systems thinking, and he doesn't believe that a perfect model exists. Because primarily arriving an optimal decision is virtually impossible, even when faced with simple problems. And this is why, again, it's a very old concept, but this is why Herbert Simon in the 1950s coined the term satisfice. Satisfice is a combination of the words satisfy and suffice. And this was coined by Simon because for him, decision makers would rather achieve real targets rather than ideal representations of systems. So they are pragmatic in nature. That's what Simon actually postulates. So if you have this attitude of satisficing, it's expected that you would instead try to meet a certain target. For example, you're a firm, you instead want to obtain target profit or stay within your cost budget. Which actually makes sense, right? When we hear about stock markets, they would rise and fall depending on how well a company performs according to their target. Like you would hear a news like Nvidia had performed better than expected and the stock market will shoot up. So that in itself is a demonstration of satisficing. And so since I'm working in systems thinking and I'm also working in optimization, I thought that there should be a middle ground. There should be a compromise between these two things, right? And that's the reason why I came up with this approach. So it's target-oriented, robust optimization. It tries to create a middle ground between being pragmatic and still coming up with an analytical form or an analytical way of performing optimization. So the key points is that it integrates flexibility. The decision maker has the ability to actually say, I am only going to consider this much uncertainty. And the targets would be specified. So this is your guarantee, okay? That no matter what happens, I'll be able to achieve this target. It preserves computational tractability. That's important because we want it to be efficient and effective. And well, for this one, it doesn't require specific assumptions. But I know robust optimization has come a long way, wherein distributions are now allowed and probabilistic information are now, they're now capable of solving it. But for this version, it's the bare bones. Okay? So I'll go through some notations first, not too difficult. So for example, we have a vector of uncertain parameters. Okay? The z bar represents your nominal data, and the z here would just be your would be the deviation. So it could be like 5 plus 5, wherein, or no, let's say 10 plus 5, and the 5 becomes your perturbation. And you can define it within this set, so that means it's parameterized by gamma here, okay? Wherein if gamma is 100%, that means the perturbation is as much as 5. If it's 0, then you're assuming that there are no uncertainties, the parameters are just equal to the nominal data. And this becomes what we call the robustness index. The higher it is, the more conservative you are, but the larger the uncertainty set you're also considering. So why is this a concept of satisficing? Because you can equate gamma as your as a decision maker's appetite for uncertainty, right? Because again, the higher the gamma, the uncertainty set becomes larger. And if you're an aggressive or an aggressive decision maker, then you might be okay with just having 0. But if you're overly conservative, then you might want to set it always at a level of 1. And this is the uncertain linear. It's still like the z tilde that you see there represents the uncertain parameter. And what's happening here is, in effect, you're like creating a vector of the constraints for all realizations of your z. Okay, so what does this mean? Like, let's say tau here is your target. It's a cost budget because it's less than or equal to. You're maximizing the size of your uncertainty set. Sorry. You're maximizing the size of your uncertainty set subject to the guarantee that I will always stay within my cost budget. So as I mentioned, it should be solved as an LP model, and you could do that by duality theory. So I won't go into the detail, but through duality theory, we can actually come up with a very concise formulation wherein we got rid of the vectors here, right? It's actually one line or one instance of the uncertain parameters. I'll show the paper later wherein the how you derive it is going to be discussed explicitly, but for the purpose of this seminar, I'll skip through that. And if you look at this model here, it's actually linear with respect to gamma. And this can easily be solved using any local search algorithm. Okay? You can fix gamma and then continuously solve again. Like, for example, you utilize bisection search, golden search, you'll be able to find the best gamma subject to the achievement of your tau. Again, as I mentioned, this is the first version, so it's a very old paper. This was a product of my PhD, so it's like a decade old. But later on, I'll show some more recent works that I've done. So I'll demonstrate the efficacy of the approach using an electrical power and energy system. So here, you're designing a network that is capable to supply energy and also nodes that would require or would have load requirements. So the objective of the design problem is to meet a given cost budget as well as possible under data uncertainty. So we actually considered cost components in the form of installation or investment costs and also emission costs. The problem is hypothetical. We just use a 12-area node network, which, again, each node has the capability to transmit energy, but would also be requiring some load generation. And there are different types of generation plants in the system: coal, hydroelectric, geothermal, and natural gas. So this network was obtained from another paper, and we just use it as a starting point. So again, each node can facilitate both power generation and load activities. The configuration of the nodes is given by these arcs. And there are also capacity considerations and the distribution of supply via the interconnections to satisfy the demand. These would be the complete set of data parameters. So there are two sources of uncertainty. One would be the emissions of each energy source, and the other one would be the generation requirements. The load requirements of each node. So not all nodes would have load requirements, but if you're seeing numbers here, then that means it would require, or it has load requirements, and we use a plus minus of 50%. That's how large the maximum uncertainty could be. And then this would be the range. Okay? Okay, now let me explain how it actually goes. Because there's no, when I say that Toro is prescriptive, it doesn't give you a single answer. It gives you a range of answers because again, it caters to decision makers that would have varying appetites of uncertainty. So for example, you set your budget in this way. Again, just hypothetical, sorry. It can range from as low as 35,000 to as high as 48,000. And with those cost budgets would be the corresponding gamma. So this would be the best value of gamma that you can achieve. Okay? So now you might ask, so what then? Well, the thing about this is it should always be accompanied by out of sample testing, or in our case, we perform Monte Carlo simulation here. So 3,000 randomly generated realizations of the uncertain data for both emissions and demand. And this is an example of what happens for a gamma of 1. So that means a gamma of 1 is the most conservative. Okay? It assumes that all of the uncertain parameters would be at the highest level of perturbation. That's why the cost is also very high. But what can you observe here? The dashed line will be the 48,000. All 3,000 realizations were actually to the left of the dashed line. So that means it was better than expected. And this gives you an indicator that probably setting this target this high will not be good for my decision. I'm being overly conservative even if it's not needed. Now let's look at the rest of the histograms. As you go from top to bottom, gamma is increasing, so that means you're becoming conservative. So this quadrant here is the one wherein you're very aggressive. I'm going to set my budget really low, but what happens? It's the exact opposite of what you observed in the previous slide, right? Everything was now towards the right side of that dashed line. So this indicates that you might have been too aggressive such that you'll never achieve your cost budget. So let's go to the next quadrant. The next quadrant now slowly shifts the solution, and you're now seeing how the actual performance behaves. And I think this profile of solutions would now be your guide as a decision maker. Again, it's prescriptive in the sense that it would show you the performance of your solution, but it doesn't tell you exactly what to do. Okay? So depending on how you perceive uncertainty, you might be comfortable with taking 0.60. Or if you want a higher level of guarantee, you might even choose a 0.8 gamma. Okay? And the table you're seeing on the right side is just some performance metrics you can consider. So for example, you can get the average value, the standard value, standard deviation, the probability of constraint achievement, and so on. Okay? So again, all of these metrics you can use to judge or to gauge where you will be comfortable with. For this example, obviously it would vary across systems, but for this example, you would see that it's actually better to err on the more conservative side because all of the higher gammas would not be as good in terms of performance, right? Well, in all approaches that you will be developing, it's always good to compare it with the status quo. So we compare this with sample average approximation. It's one way to gauge how well it will perform with respect to stochastic optimization. For SAA, we used a sample size of 500, and that led to a solution time of 403 seconds versus 19 seconds for Toro. Because again, Toro is just solved as an LP model, but whereas SAA would still be complex or computationally intensive in a sense that if we push this to a higher level in terms of sample size, then the solution time would also exponentially increase. Okay, so for SAA, in SAA's case, we use or we minimize the expected cost, right? And the optimal cost for that was 40,148. And how did we compare? We then set this as the target and computed for the maximum gamma, which ended up at 0.55, which makes sense, right? Because SAA tries to look at the middle. That's how stochastic optimization is. So just comparing the two, for SAA, this was using out of sample testing also. For SAA, the mean was 43,000 versus 42,000, 2.8 versus 2.6, and so on. The point is, it actually overperforms SAA just because of this concept that if you set your robustness level as 0.55, it actually guarantees that it will achieve your target from 0.55 below. Okay? But in SAA, there will still be a probability that both sides would be violated. You understand it, right? It's like if you look at the bell curve, it's always the tail end probabilities that get discarded for SAA. But for robust design, for the Toro approach, there's a guarantee that from 0.55 below, it will always be achieved no matter what happens. Regardless if you feel that the target is set too low or too high, but that's the guarantee. Now, you might ask, what have I been doing since the first version of Toro? Admittedly, after I developed this approach, I became more interested in collaborating with different fields. So aside from energy systems, this has been applied to biomass, to supply chains and all those, like all applications. And it was just recently, actually during COVID, that I started to go back to the theoretical part of Toro. So this has been the roadmap so far. It's because of the emergence of big data as well. I started to look into data-driven Toro and the possibility of extending Toro to having multiple objectives, because in the previous model, it was just a single gamma. What if we could have different targets and different levels of target achievements as well? And then finally, a closed-loop Toro, which just includes feedback. So this is a more recent paper. I think it was published May of this year. Okay, let me explain. So the first diagram that you're seeing on top is how we typically view decisions, right? We have data, we process the data, we optimize it, and that's it. But we need to recognize the fact that in everything there's feedback. We need to be receptive to what's happening in the real world. So what did we do for this paper? We know that in all models, it's garbage in, garbage out. So instead of just setting the uncertainty set by expert opinion, you can actually use machine learning or any data analytics tool that you know to refine that uncertainty set. So that became our basis, and that was then fed to the model here. Okay. Here we use data, but it doesn't really matter, any Greek letter. Okay? And then in the previous version, we didn't actually update the uncertainty set, but we know that it could easily be done. So we created a feedback system here, wherein when you get new information, then you can update it, plug it in your machine learning, and then get the more accurate uncertainty set for your model. And then we kept on doing that until we completely solved the model. So it's a simple concept, but it was very very effective, or it actually significantly improved the performance of the model. Okay? And then there's another one, as I mentioned, the multi-objective Tor. This was just published last week. Okay? And it's already the third generation. It was the product of the students of my student. Okay, so third generation of Toro. What you're seeing here is a Pareto diagram. Usually, what we put in the Pareto are conflicting objectives, right? If you want to maximize profit, minimize emissions, those are what you'll see in the axis. But for this one, since we're using different levels of gamma, that's going to be what you'll be plugging here. And then therefore, that's the time you judge, is this objective more important than the other? You now create different non-dominated solutions. So therefore, giving you more options. However, it's actually more complicated because more options, more headache. but at least you have this option to not lump everything into one target. You can actually separate them and come up with different metrics for them. I'm actually under time, but we can just use the time for questions. So Tor is not for all systems. I'm not claiming that it's the best among all approaches, but there are certain applications that you might find useful, or you would find useful for it, like specifically for problems that exhibit endogenous uncertainties. What do I mean by that? Endogenous uncertainties are uncertainties that get revealed after you make a decision, as opposed to exogenous uncertainties like the price of gas, right? It doesn't matter, you don't have to make a decision each day, it's going to be revealed. But for endogenous uncertainties, especially for investment decisions, Toro might be a good way because there's a higher penalty for getting infeasibility, right? That's why I found it useful to gas field development, capacity expansion, equipment installation, these types of problems, wherein the level of granularity would not be as critical. Okay? If you're talking about minutes, seconds, then probably you would be better off sticking with probability distributions. But if it's not as accurate, then you can get away with this because it balances effectiveness and efficiency. And sometimes efficiency might be more important, right? At least you get something that you can use. And some things to watch out for, like what I said, garbage in, garbage out. If you define your uncertainty set, if you weren't able to define it correctly, then everything else would follow. Because this approach is heavily dependent on the uncertainty set definition. So as you should be investing your time in coming up with accurate ranges for the uncertain parameters that you might have. And actually, that's it. It's a short presentation. Yeah, thank you. If you have any questions, you have time. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie, for your sharing. I have a question. So, what is the significance when you considering the uncertainty in your problem?
Well, the significance really is because if you make your decisions assuming that everything is known, again, it's easy to come up with solutions that will become infeasible later on. So you need to hedge. I guess that's the term. You need to hedge against the uncertainty at the decision-making stage. You need to anticipate that something wrong will happen and at least give yourself protection. Because when you assume that everything will happen as you planned it, then it's like when you plan to fail, you fail to plan. Something like that, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question regarding the feedback tool. I was wondering, so in this specific model, right, I wonder if you can actually give us an example how this can be used.
Like, yeah, okay. Especially if you have a multi-period problem, right? Each period, an uncertainty will be revealed. Or each time, not really a multi-period, but yeah, a multi-period problem wherein, for example, at the end of the year, you make your investment and something gets revealed, right? So once that revelation happens, then your uncertainty set might change, because then you can adjust the actual values of the uncertainty set. So you might start with 0 to 10, let's just say 0 to 10. But slowly with the revelation of the information, you can make that like more narrow, which improves the accuracy of your estimates. Basically, it's just improving the information that you're getting. So it's kind of like a rolling horizon thing.
So you're not necessarily training some sort of policy depending on what the uncertainty may be.
Your policy might change just because you're changing the uncertainty set. Yeah. So it's like coming up with a more informed decision just because you're becoming flexible with the changes that are happening.
Yes, actually, I have a similar question, like in this slide. Like, can you talk more about how is the feedback system is like will change the data?
Okay, again, let's give an example. Like for example, I'm ExxonMobil. I want to open up oil wells offshore. Okay, I would have at the start I would probably have like 10 candidate locations, and then no matter how sophisticated my surveys would be, I know it's going to still be highly uncertain. But once you open one well, you would get good information on that. And then you can now use the information on that well to change your other estimates for the remaining wells.
Like, do you change for example, the probability distribution?
You can do that. You can include probability distribution. So you might be able to change some of the parameters in that just because a new information came in, right? It's the main purpose of machine learning. You're training your model, it actually gets more is that the word? Perceptive? I'm not sure if that's a word, but you're getting more in tune with what's happening in your system, because everything at the start is a guess. Especially if you have like a 10-year horizon, you don't really know what's going to happen year 1, year 2, right? It's like telling your model is becoming an expert with what's happening in that system. And by allowing it to update, you get a better set of decisions.
Yes, later you mentioned that there are like two types of uncertainties. One is endogenous uncertainty, the other is external uncertainty. Like in this feedback system, like you have what kind of uncertainty?
It's still endogenous.
So for the external uncertainty, actually this does not work. Right?
It works for external uncertainties as well, but we just observe that it works better for endogenous. But obviously, even if you have exogenous uncertainty, you can still use this. And you can still use machine learning for that.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a limitation, it's just that we observe. It's best for those types of uncertainties.
So my question is also based on this slide. So for the machine learning process, I'm wondering like what specific model did you use and how was
I
the
forgot, but
performance?
I know we tried three approaches. One was SRA. I forgot the actual names, but we tested 3 and then we chose just the best performing one in terms of the regression equation. The method is in the paper. But the 3 most common regressions, we tested it, and based on the best one, that's what we used moving forward. Yeah. So there was a training set and there was an actual data that we used. Yeah. The postdocs are very active.
I have one question about your combination between the robust optimization and the multi-objective optimization process. Well, you have one slide about this.
This one?
Sure. So my question is, do you find any interesting point about the effects from the robust control for the parallel front distribution? The parallel front distribution.
We didn't look toward, we didn't go to that level. We just explored the different non-dominated solution in this. But I understand that you can actually solve, right? We didn't go into that.
Yes, you can.
Yeah,
I'm sure
you
you
can.
can find some interesting
Yeah.
points under the parallel front
Yeah.
under the robust control because
I know, you
solutions
can
are
create,
dispersed.
I know,
Yes.
I know. Yeah, but for this, we just explored the possibility of coming up with different robustness levels.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
What else? Yeah.
Did you ever try combining distributionally robust optimization?
Not yet, but that would be the next step. Yeah, I'm not really into like the probability distribution, but I know I should try. But yes, I'm aware that it's now being done and extensively. So that could be a next step as well.
I mean, it's done by other people.
Yes. Well, my advisor actually had a lot of papers on distributionally robust.
I mean, plus target oriented.
Oh no, without like just the traditional robust optimization, like the distributionally robust optimization. That's certainly like a new research area to be explored. Yeah. All right. Thanks for
Okay,
the
thank you,
the
Charlie,
interesting
thank you,
discussion.
everyone.